The town of Hollow Creek was a place suspended in time, a postcard of American life from decades past. It was the kind of town where generations lived and died in the same houses, where gossip was the primary form of entertainment, and where the most significant event in a given year was the annual bake-off, a competition Eleanor Finch had won 3 years running. Her lemon meringue pie was legendary, and so was she, a picture of quiet, respectable domesticity, the kind of woman who was always at church on Sunday and always had a casserole ready for a sick neighbor. Eleanor's husband, Arthur, was her charming, boisterous opposite. A real estate agent, he was the town's go-getter, a man who could sell a dilapidated barn with the same ease he could sell a multi-million-dollar estate. He had a smile that could disarm a bank auditor and a handshake that promised fortune. They lived in a beautiful home on Elm Street, a testament to Arthur's success, and their life from the outside was one of perfect, aspirational bliss. Across town, life was simpler for Thomas and Evelyn Reed. Thomas, a quiet accountant who found comfort in columns of numbers, was a man of routines. He went to work at 8 a.m., came home at 5:30 p.m., and spent his evenings watching the news and tending to his vegetable garden. Evelyn was the town librarian, a woman with a soft smile and an equally soft voice. Her passions were simple: crossword puzzles, the scent of old books, and the lavender she cultivated in a sprawling garden that bordered their neat colonial home. Their life was not one of grand gestures, but of a quiet, settled peace. But beneath the surface of both lives, a subtle poison was seeping in. Evelyn, despite her calm exterior, felt a growing sense of suffocation. Her life with Thomas was comfortable, but it lacked fire. She craved something more, a spark, a moment of passion, a feeling of being truly seen. She found it in the most unlikely of places, a small, unassuming coffee shop during her lunch break. That's where she met Arthur Finch. Their initial conversations were innocent, a shared laugh over a bad latte, a discussion about a novel Evelyn had just finished. But the meetings became more frequent, the topics more personal. Arthur listened to her with an intensity Thomas never had. He spoke of exotic places, of grand ambitions, of a life she had only read about in books. He made her feel vibrant, alive. Their stolen moments in his car, parked on a lonely country road, were a thrilling escape. Their secret, clandestine affair became her new addiction, her lifeline to a more exciting world. It was a world that felt like a betrayal, yet it was also the only place she felt like herself. On a drizzly Tuesday afternoon in October, their secret rendezvous took a turn. They were in a motel room on the edge of the next town, a place chosen for its anonymity. Arthur, emboldened by a sudden rush of emotion, laid out his plan. He would leave Eleanor, he said. They would sell their houses, start a new life together somewhere far from Hollow Creek. Evelyn, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration, agreed. She promised to call him that night, after she had spoken to Thomas. She never called. The next morning, Thomas Reed woke up to an empty house. He called out her name, his voice echoing through the silent rooms. Her favorite mug was in the sink, her keys were on the kitchen counter, but her car was gone. Her phone, a simple flip phone she rarely used, was also gone. At first, Thomas told himself she had simply gone out early to run an errand. He checked her calendar. Nothing. He called her parents, her sister. No one had heard from her. Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in. By noon he was at the police station. Detective Michael Thorne, a man with a weary face and a reputation for quiet competence, took the case. He listened to Thomas's account, the details of Evelyn's routine, the lack of any discernible enemies or problems. There were no signs of forced entry, no note, no struggle. It was as if Evelyn had simply walked out and vanished. The initial investigation was a whirlwind of activity. Police combed the area, helicopters flew overhead, and volunteers scoured the woods. They spoke to Thomas, who was visibly devastated, his grief raw and transparent. They spoke to Arthur, who, with his practiced charm, played the part of a helpful business acquaintance. "I last saw her a few weeks ago," he said, his smile flawless, "when I was showing a listing. She's a lovely woman. I hope you find her." Arthur's alibi was also solid. He had been at an open house all day, confirmed by multiple witnesses. Without a body, a motive, or a single piece of physical evidence, the trail went cold. The flyers with Evelyn's smiling face, once plastered on every lamppost and store window, began to peel and fade in the sun. Evelyn Reed became a ghost, a legend whispered in hushed tones in Hollow Creek. Years passed. The lavender garden in Evelyn's yard withered and died. Thomas, unable to live in a house haunted by her absence, sold it and moved to another town. Hollow Creek slowly returned to its sleepy rhythm, the memory of the missing librarian a scar that had begun to heal over. The case was filed away, a cold, unsolved mystery. But stories have a way of waiting. 10 years later, a crew from a commercial demolition company was tearing down the abandoned industrial park on the outskirts of Hollow Creek. The park, once a symbol of the town's brief flirtation with industry, had been derelict for 2 decades. The crew was working on the foundation of an old factory, a monolithic concrete block that had resisted every effort to be broken. They brought in a specialized rig, a hydraulic breaker that finally cracked the concrete like a nut. As the giant blocks of debris were carted away, a piece of bone was found embedded in the rock-solid interior. The foreman, a seasoned veteran of the industry, knew instantly what it was. The skeleton was a macabre time capsule. Its position, curled and contorted, suggested it had been put there before the concrete was poured. Its clothing was tattered but still recognizable. On its left hand, a single gold wedding band gleamed dully. The dental records, faded and yellowed with age, confirmed what the police already suspected. They had found Evelyn Reed. The murder investigation was reopened with a fierce intensity. Detective Thorne, now older and wearier, but with the same quiet competence, was put back on the case. The cause of death was determined to be a single crushing blow to the back of the skull, likely from a blunt object. The forensic team meticulously sifted through the concrete, looking for anything: a hair, a fiber, a weapon. They found nothing. The case was once again at a standstill. But Thorne had a gut feeling. He was bothered by the concrete itself. A property record search showed that the factory had been shuttered years before Evelyn went missing, and the concrete floor had been poured more recently to stabilize a crumbling section of the building. Who would pour a new foundation in an old, abandoned factory, especially in such a remote area? The trail led to a small private contractor. When Thorne questioned the owner, the man remembered the job well. It was a rush job, he said, for some shell company. They paid cash. Name was something like Finch Industries. Thorne felt a jolt of recognition. Finch. Arthur Finch. He pulled up the old case files. Arthur Finch. The charming real estate agent who had been a helpful acquaintance. The pieces began to fall into place. A deeper dive into property records revealed that the factory had indeed been owned by a shell corporation registered to Arthur Finch, purchased just 6 months before Evelyn disappeared. Thorne had a warrant within the hour. The police arrived at the beautiful home on Elm Street. Arthur Finch, now a decade older but no less charming, opened the door, a confused smile on his face. "Detective Thorne," he said, "long time no see. What can I do for you?" He was read his rights and brought in for questioning. Arthur, still confident in his old alibi, denied everything. "I had nothing to do with it," he insisted. "That old factory? I sold that property years ago. I only handled the legal paperwork on it, that's all. It was a fixer-upper and I handled the sale for the previous owners." The detectives, however, had another plan. They pulled the silent, dignified Eleanor into a separate interrogation room. They spoke to her not as a suspect but as a sympathetic ear. They laid out the timeline, the shell corporation, the discovery of the body. They described the state of Evelyn's remains, the blow to her skull. They watched Eleanor's composure slowly crack. The perfectly coiffed hair, the placid face, the calm demeanor, it all began to fray. "He told me everything," Eleanor finally whispered, her voice a thin, reedy sound, almost lost in the cavernous interrogation room. "He told me he was going to leave me for her." The truth that unfolded was far more chilling than a crime of passion. Eleanor, in her cold, calculated fury, had confronted Evelyn. Not in a fit of rage but with a serene, terrifying purpose. She had listened as Evelyn, frightened by the confrontation, had promised to end the affair. But Eleanor knew that promise was hollow. She had seen how Evelyn looked at Arthur, and she knew the depths of his deception. To Eleanor, Evelyn wasn't just a rival, she was a threat to her entire life, a flaw in the perfect tapestry she had woven for herself. Eleanor couldn't risk losing the status, the respect, the life she had built. Eleanor had lured Evelyn to the factory, a place where no one would ever see them. She had pretended to want a final, private conversation, a moment to clear the air. But as Evelyn, relieved and unsuspecting, turned to walk away, Eleanor had picked up a heavy piece of discarded rebar and struck her with a single brutal blow. Her plan for the body was even more terrifyingly methodical. She had confessed the affair to Arthur, framing it as a desperate, manipulative move on Evelyn's part. She convinced him that Evelyn was a disturbed woman who was trying to sabotage his business. She then fabricated a story about needing to dispose of some old building materials at the factory site, a task too heavy for her alone. Oblivious to the true nature of the material, Arthur, in a panicked rush to cover up his indiscretion and protect his public image, had unwittingly helped his wife encase Evelyn's body in the concrete foundation. He had provided the shell corporation, the payment, and the unwitting manual labor, all while believing he was just tidying up a messy real estate deal. The real shock to Hollow Creek wasn't that Evelyn had been murdered. People had long suspected as much. It was the discovery that the person who took her life wasn't a spurned lover or a jealous husband, but the seemingly respectable woman who had been a quiet figure in the town all along. The woman who had been a model of decorum and had been the last person to see Evelyn alive. She had been hiding in plain sight, a silent witness to her own terrible crime for 10 long years. Eleanor Finch was arrested that day and charged with first-degree murder. Her case was the most sensational thing to ever happen in Hollow Creek. The trial was a media circus. Arthur, his reputation and business in ruins, was a key witness for the prosecution. He testified against his wife, his face a mask of shame and disbelief, a man who had been a fool and a victim in the same breath. The town of Hollow Creek watched on, their perfect veneer shattered, their faith in their neighbors permanently shaken. Eleanor was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. She never showed an ounce of remorse. Her final statement to the court was a simple, chilling sentence. "I did what was necessary to protect my life." And with that, the book on the case of Evelyn Reed was finally closed. But in Hollow Creek, the story of the librarian, the real estate agent, and the quiet woman who committed a perfect crime would forever be the town's true, shocking legend.